How's it going, everybody? So you may have noticed for the past few months I haven't been posting any of my monthly recap videos, and the reason for that is, back in June, I had a lot of movies that I had to try to do some homework on and to catch up with, but the timing of it all ended up being that if I was to release a recap video for June, it would have been at the very end of the month of July when I actually had the opportunity to catch up with everything. And so at that point, I felt like it would have been almost pointless to make a video just because of how late it would have been. And so then I thought, why don't I make less videos that have higher quality images and production to them? And the result of that is, what I'm now going to be doing is I'll still do recaps for what I think of a certain amount of movies that came out in a specific time period. But now it's going to be where I recap everything that came out in a specific movie season. So with that, I'm going to be covering a wide variety of movies that came out from June through the end of August of 2019 that I saw and had opinions of. And you'll see that a lot of the movies in here aren't ones that I covered directly here on YouTube, but ones had reviews that were scattered across YouTube itself, Facebook, and then just random little posts I made on Letterboxd as well. I will be covering the bad movies I saw, the mediocre ones, the decent ones, the good ones, and the great ones as well. With that in mind, I hope you'd enjoy what I have to share today in my ranking of all the best and worst films of the summer 2019, and thanks for watching.
There potentially could have been more bad films to talk about here, but if I'm being honest, I don't go out of my way to see really bad films unless they already have had a lot of public exposure. I consider my time to be too precious for me to spend it on something I find totally wasteful and painful. That being said, I saw a handful of films that I just can't abide. Half of them were just plain boring and completely unfocused, such as Dark Phoenix, Men in Black International, and Where'd You Go Bernadette. These films harbor some positive qualities like good performances, but they're both bland properties in what they have to offer for storylines and visual presentation. A worse offender in this regard is The Secret Life of Pets 2, which is quite possibly the most useless movie that Illumination has made yet. Sure, something like Minions may be more insufferable and cringe-inducing, but for me, I find things worse than an animated movie that not only wastes its cartoony potential, but takes 3 rejected B-plots from a bad sitcom and tries to throw them together into one disjointed hodgepodge of a story. The result is more painfully boring than you can already imagine. The Lion King takes the cake with being oppressively dull, for it never finds the means of justifying its own existence. You can always check out my 20-minute video on this movie to learn why, but to be short, this creatively inept remake gave no compelling reasons for Disney to keep rehashing their traditionally animated material. Well, other than the obvious reasons. I certainly could have used more hilariously bad failures. Only 47 Meters Down Uncaged, one of the most pointless and inept sequels I've ever seen, could do that for me. But of all the bad films I saw this summer, I think the one which put me through the least bit of suffering was surprisingly the second Angry Birds movie. This one actually had some worthwhile comedic moments such as the urinal scene, and the voice actors didn't phone in their performances for the most part. If the story and pacing were finer tuned, and the aggravatingly repetitive music jokes were kept to a minimum, I might have actually given this one a pass, but it just ended up being the one that didn't make me as angry as the rest of them. That being said, I would generally rather have bad movies than ones like those I'm about to mention. The difference between a bad movie and a mediocre one is how well they stick with you. A completely negative experience will at least remain in your memory, whereas the less meaningful ones pass through you without much resistance. With that, when my friends ask me what I thought of a movie, my preferred response would be a head shake as opposed to a shoulder shrug. Primarily, the reason why I might find a movie to be mediocre is wasted potential. Movies that perfectly fit this consist of The Dead Don't Die, Yesterday, Late Night, The Peanut Butter Falcon, and Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. I wouldn't call any of these films bad, especially since some of them were helmed by very competent and artistically gifted directors. If someone argued their case for why they liked them, I'd be more willing to accept their opinions and see their points of view. Nonetheless, what I hoped to gain from each experience was squandered by their deeply underwhelming stories. What another saw as high art or worthwhile entertainment, I saw as a disappointment. In the cases of Hobbs and Shaw and The Other Side of Heaven 2, neither of those films really grabbed my attention. Their filmmaking and even some of the performances were well done, but overall they didn't work as well as I would have liked. They didn't register as utter waste of time, yet they could have been made with greater love and care. While I feel no burning passion for any of the movies I'll mention here, at least I can say that I gained something from watching them. Enough could be taken from their respective experiences for me to possibly recommend them to somebody. The strongest example of this would be Midsommar, which is writer-director Ari Aster's follow-up to his shocking debut, Hereditary, in 2018. Certainly it's a masterclass in filmmaking, with its unique utilization of lighting, practical effects, real locations, and shot composition to make an experience unlike anything I've ever felt from a horror film before. The score and performances are also highly effective, with some of the year's most disturbing and memorable moments due to both aspects. That being said, I could have done without the excessive runtime and time spent on sequences that didn't do much for the means of character building. I won't dispute someone who claims this is one of the best films of the year, but my own experience just doesn't match up with how most other people felt. The three other films I'll mention for this section are well made and have very strong qualities, yet didn't quite reach the level to where I can wholeheartedly recommend them to somebody. The Fighting Preacher is better than most of the year's Christian films, and focuses its attention on dynamic, realistic human characters rather than letting the doctrine do the talking. Still, a general lack of subtlety and cheap-looking production value hurt its impact on me. Loose goes for the throat with its ambitious approach to questioning racial dynamics in America, and can be considered a fascinating conversation starter. I just wish it wasn't shot as poorly as it was, on top of following a really repetitive formula of how dramatic conversations would play out. And lastly, Aquarella is a marvelously shot documentary about water, a natural force that's equally life-sustaining and destructive. I just felt that the film was uneven in messaging and rhythm, while also featuring a bit too many metal riffs. Still, the effort put forth in making all these films was commendable, and I would have no issue giving a soft recommendation to most people. They at least deserve a shot from genuine film fans. And now we move on to the really worthwhile stuff. The following movies aren't what I'd classify as instant classics, but I wouldn't hesitate to say they're worth full price admissions at a theater. Despite whatever flaws these movies have, I felt completely satisfied watching them. Half of them were entertaining superhero movies, in which most people will have seen Spider-Man Far From Home. It's a successful follow-up to the amazing closure that Avengers Endgame brought to the Infinity Saga, despite the Disney vs. Sony controversy that's struck up since the film's release. It's not top-tier Marvel fare, but certainly fun enough to watch multiple times over. Shockingly enough, though, I found that Batman vs. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to be even more satisfying than Far From Home was. This movie will never be considered high art, but I was surprised by how much I legitimately enjoyed it. For a crossover between two completely dissimilar franchises in tone and story, the result is as good as you would ever want it to be. The story's ridiculous but thankfully offset by fun sequences, enjoyable interactions between the characters, and awesome action sequences. A brisk 80-minute runtime makes for an easily digestible and fun experience that I hope more people seek out. For more adult-oriented fare, might I suggest The Last Black Man in San Francisco? It's one of the most fascinating film debuts of the year, featuring intriguing cinematography and a strong screenplay written and performed by newcomer Jimmy Fails. Its pacing and heavy tone are such that I don't feel a need to watch it anytime soon, but the one-time experience of seeing it in the theater was a great one. On the more lighthearted and entertaining end of the spectrum, the breakout horror comedy Ready or Not is a truly great time. This concise, tight, and very enjoyable film manages to strike a fine balance between tension, over-the-top scenarios, and sharp satire about the fears young couples have prior to marriage. I had a lot of fun with this one, and I imagine that anyone else who can handle a little bit of blood and gore in their movies would as well. Despite how weak the summer felt as a whole, some of the year's best films were released over the past few months. A couple of these were genuine surprises, the greatest of which was an independent film called The Art of Self-Defense. It may not be the first project from the burgeoning filmmaker Riley Stearns, but this might as well be his breakout due to how clever, inventive, surprising, and flat-out hilarious it is. Very few movies have caused me to literally laugh out loud this year, and this bonkers satire about toxic masculinity was one of them. Huge props to everyone involved for pulling this off, especially Jesse Eisenberg and Alessandro Nivola for their standout performances. Another surprise was Lulu Wang's The Farewell. As of now, it's one of my favorite movies of the entire year, given its skillful presentation, smart screenplay, and just how wholesome of a family movie it is. The Farewell may have a fresh and distinct Chinese identity, but its themes about family dynamics are about as universal as they come. Because of this, I got a lot out of my experience, and I highly recommend it to everybody. It's a movie that anyone could potentially love, regardless of their taste in movies. This past summer also brought about titles from a couple of my favorite filmmakers. I was highly stoked for both of them, and I wasn't disappointed in the slightest. First off, Quentin Tarantino's supposedly penultimate movie, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, proves that the man's advancing age has had no effect on his creativity whatsoever. The film may be slow and long, sure, but that never stopped it from being a thoughtful and very funny trip back to the late 1960s. I felt as though I had been transported back to that era, which is appropriate given the immersive fairy tale approach that Tarantino went with. It all builds to a massively satisfying finale that I could not get enough of. I was also very hyped to see what was next from Jennifer Kent, the director of The Babadook. Her first production since that 2014 horror masterwork is not quite as good, but nonetheless a marvelously done revenge tale. Few movies I've seen in my lifetime are as savagely violent or disturbing as what Kent crafted here, so I can't say that it's widely accessible. The journey which the film takes its audiences on, though, is unforgettable, and one I consider to be rewarding by the end. If stomach-churning films about the horrifying past like Schindler's List can be classified as high art, then certainly The Nightingale can be as well. But even then, that wasn't the best film I saw this past summer. That happened to be a little indie gem called Toy Story 4. Believe me, I'm just as shocked as you are. I had no legitimate hopes or expectations for this, for I thought it would just be another passable Pixar sequel that wouldn't do much for me. Yet somehow, for a wide variety of reasons, not only is it the best movie Pixar has made in years, it's currently my favorite movie of 2019. That could easily change as more films come out this fall and in the holiday season, but whatever happens, the fact of this movie's deeply profound impact on me won't change. I tried my best to wax poetic on how the Toy Story franchise needed this movie in a different video, so for more of my thoughts, feel free to check that out. Otherwise, I have a busy, multifaceted life just like you, so I couldn't catch up with every movie that released from June to the end of August. Here are the notable films I was unable to catch up with.
Thanks again for checking out this video, guys. The next one will probably be out in mid or late November once I see all the fall movie season titles. So look forward to that, in addition to more reviews and other content coming very soon. If you liked this, please like and subscribe. It really does help me grow my channel. And if you also don't want to miss on any content as well, you can hit the bell to get notifications for every time I post. In addition, you can check out my Facebook and Letterboxd profiles for more content that you won't otherwise find here on YouTube. And in the end, thank you so much for watching as always, and you have a great one.